I thought I would give you and our viewers more detail regarding voting systems.
Excellent. I'm excited to learn the particular flaws of each system.
Why would you word that so pessimistically?
Because, even though you haven't totally convinced me range voting is particularly good, you have totally convinced me that plurality voting isn't.
I actually don't know if that's a step forward or backward. Anyway, let's say we have 21 people, all choosing between 5 options for lunch. The first thing we do is score the utility each option offers each person. We put all these utility scores in a spreadsheet to make it easier to read. The redder the score, the less acceptable the option is. The greener the score, the more acceptable it is. The first thing to notice is just how much information is contained here. In computer science, the unit of information is the bit. Since this chart contains 105 numbers, each potentially as large as 99, this table contains 735 bits of information. Now, let's turn each column in this table into a plurality ballot. In a plurality voting system, each voter can only vote for a single option. In this case, that means the option which gives the voter the highest utility gets a score of 1, and every other option on the ballot receives a score of 0. After this, we sum the total score for each food, and the highest total score is the winner. In this case, pizza wins the plurality vote with 30% of all votes. Based only on the colors in the table, it's clear we've lost information. How much? Well, it took 735 bits to describe the utility scores, while it only takes 105 bits to describe these plurality votes. That is to say, using plurality voting removes 85% of all the information about people's preferences.
Speaking only for myself, I don't like the idea of 30% of the population deciding for the rest.
I suppose you'd prefer it if the 1% decided for the other 99.
I'd rather that positive decisions could be made by the total population, in which the 99% take the appropriate cues from the 1%.
You'd make a terrible politician.
And yet, a fine philosopher king.
Next, let's talk about instant runoff voting. The key advantage IRV has over plurality voting is that no candidate can win until she has a majority. It works like this. A voter ranks her choices on a ballot. In the first round, only the first place votes are counted. This is just like plurality voting. However, instead of declaring a winner, we eliminate the least popular option. Everyone whose first choice has been eliminated now has their second choice votes counted. We see that both D and R preferred pizza as their second choice, so in the second count, pizza has 8 total votes. But that still isn't a majority. We have to repeat this process, this time looking at the next preferred choice of those ballots which preferred salads. Finally, we repeat this for burgers, and we are left with only 2 options, pizza with 10 votes and burritos with 11 votes. Burritos has won with 57% of the vote.
Is it just me, or did some people get to vote twice in this election?
Well, it depends. Have you ever voted for a third-party candidate?
No.
Why not?
Because a vote for a candidate unlikely to win is a wasted vote.
Right. In a plurality system, every vote that's not given to the top 2 candidates is wasted. Essentially, IRV gives people who support unpopular candidates a mulligan. We are saying, I'm sorry you backed a losing cause. Would you like to try again?
Huh. And here I thought I was using the phrase wasted vote hyperbolically. But no. Apparently it's literally wasted.
Well, when we're talking about IRV, we sort of have to think about it that way. Otherwise, we most certainly have allowed some people to vote more than once. This is a very real reason why people might prefer a real runoff, like they use in France. In a real runoff, the least popular options are removed from the ballot and everyone votes again. The downside is that this is expensive in both time and money.
Is there any good news?
A little. To start with, we've moved to an election system in which 315 bits of information are being used. That's still less than half of our available information, but it's 3 times more than we were using with plurality. We've also decreased our Bayesian regret by about 12%. But let's see if we can make even more progress with a Borda system. Just like in IRV, each ballot ranks its choices from 1 to 5, and this trims our voting information down to 315 bits. But, instead of holding multiple rounds of elections, each food gets 1 point each time it appears on a ballot, plus 1 point for each food ranked lower than it on each ballot. For example, voter A has burritos ranked 2, which means there are 3 foods, pizza, salads, and sandwiches, ranked lower. Therefore, voter A's ballot gives 4 points to burritos. Once this is done for all ballots, the points for each food are summed across all ballots, and the food with the most points wins. In this case, that would be burritos. Since this is the same winner as IRV, we haven't improved our outcome.
That's true, but I feel like you're leaving out the most significant step you've taken.
Right. We're no longer concerned whether a majority or plurality of the population supports a food. In this example, burritos are the Borda winner with 77 points. While it's true there is a maximum points value, the Borda winner doesn't need to get some arbitrary percentage thereof. It just needs more points than any other option.
I think it's worth dwelling on this point. People with traditional ideas about democracy,
Do you mean old people?
including but not limited to old people, might find it a bit unsettling that this voting system abandons the idea of majority rule.
I think I can assuage those fears. We have to ask ourselves, why do we value majority rule? Is it an end in and of itself? I think it's quite clearly not an end in itself. It's a means toward the end of establishing the will of the people. So, next we ask ourselves, is majority rule the best way to establish the will of the people? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But as we investigate the virtues of voting systems which abandon majority rule, at the very least we should keep an open mind. And that brings us to the summit of our discussion today, range voting. In order to determine the votes of our constituency for the other voting methods, we needed to create this utility table, which contains 735 bits of information. The beauty of range voting is that these data are the actual votes.
And thus, we arrive at the fundamental problem with your method.
You know, I really feel like I was building some momentum there. Why would you have to go and ruin it?
Because you're quantifying the quality of a voting system by directly comparing it to the utility table. But, for range voting, we're using the utility table as the votes. Of course range voting will look the best when we judge it using this system. This is like comparing the fit of a variety of suits, and then being pleasantly surprised when the custom-tailored suit fits best.
You're almost absolutely correct. The key here is to remember that the only reason we're even considering range voting is because the utility table is a good way to describe people's preferences. Instead of trying to cleverly design some kind of voting system that contains the most essential information of the utility table, we just said, to hell with it, we'll vote with the utility table.
Fair enough, but I still have another reservation. People aren't good at quantifying their preferences. Do you really value pumpkin pie 10 points more than apple pie as long as whipped cream is available, but 15 points less if it isn't? What does saying that even mean? And beyond the fact people are bad at quantifying their preferences, they might do it in different ways. Some people might think candidate scores should be evenly distributed. Others might prefer a Gaussian distribution. Neither is necessarily better than the other, but adding together scores which were awarded on different scales makes very little sense, mathematically.
Your statements are true, but they're not meaningful. Small inconsistencies won't change our results. In fact, I've produced an inaccurate utility table in which each voter misjudges her utility by up to 5 points, specifically to meet this objection. We can use this new table to represent our range vote ballots, if you would prefer.
I would, thank you.
So, each ballot contains a numerical score for each food. Each food score is the average across all ballots, and the food with the highest average score wins. In this case, that's burgers. As I said previously, we actually directly used the utility table as our ballots, so we're using 100% of the available information. Also, we've decreased our Bayesian regret by nearly 20% compared to plurality.
So, at this point, you have me pretty convinced that range voting is the best system, if we value Bayesian regret as the standard for determining the will of the public, and not majority rule. But that's a non-trivial shift in values.
Although I can't tell you what to value, I can make a pretty strong case that the best majority rule system, IRV, has major flaws. First among these is the no-show paradox. Voters can obtain a better result by not voting. Consider these 3 voters who prefer pizza to salads to burgers. If they vote, salads is eliminated on the first ballot, then burgers wins on the next ballot. If they hadn't voted at all, salads would have survived through the first ballot and then beaten burgers on the second. By voting, they ended up with a worse outcome. Is that really a property we want in a voting system?
That seems like a fairly niche case. How likely is that, really?
In Warren D. Smith's models, this occurs in 16.2% of all IRV elections.
Oh, okay then.
IRV also fails to be monotonic, which means that, by ranking a candidate more highly, you can cause that candidate to lose. In simulations, this happens in about 14.5% of elections.
Now you're almost making me want to go back to plurality voting.
While it's true that plurality voting is monotonic and avoids the no-show paradox, it is, by far, the system that most encourages people to avoid voting for their favorite candidate. Remember how your vote is completely wasted if you vote for a third-party candidate?
We seem to be moving away from a philosophical discussion contrasting majority rule against utility rule and into a technical discussion about the incentives voters face.
Well, the incentives voters face in a majority rule system are different than those in a utility rule system, so a discussion thereof is relevant. There's no sense in hoping to have a majority rule system without a willingness to confront the problems in its implementation.
I'm guessing range voting is monotonic, avoids the no-show paradox, and always rewards you for voting for your favorite?
Indeed. You are a regular Sherlock Holmes.
Nah, you're just predictable. One last thing. Isn't this entire discussion woefully incomplete since we haven't yet considered multi-winner elections? Isn't that a rather glaring omission since multi-winner elections can play an important role in combating pressing problems like gerrymandering and proportional representation?
I feel like there should be a long, compound German word for one who delights in raining on another's parade.
Maybe our viewers will provide you with one for next time. Until then.